We're here at Wesleyan University. We're here at Wesleyan University. Thanks, Gina, for correcting me. With Gina Athena Ulysse, who's a professor of anthropology here. And I wonder if we could just start by going back a ways in terms of your life. So often in your writing, both in terms of your public scholarship and your academic work, you mention your background and growing up in Haiti as a starting point. So I'm wondering if you could just talk us through how that fits into your work now, where you came from, and how that led you into studying anthropology.
Sure. I mean, it's true. It's absolutely integral to how I sort of fell into this, and I didn't quite fall into it. I grew up in Haiti, and I actually migrated to the U.S. I wanted to be a singer. It's related. It's all related. I wanted to be a singer, and then, of course, I moved to the U.S. It's the 80s. I wanted to be a rock star. So that's just the inevitable aspect of that, right? Migration, rock star, 80s. And I tried. I actually moved to New York City, and things didn't quite work out. And I packed up a bag, I worked, saved money, and went to Europe and just like to find myself. I literally have that story.
So this was at about how old?
Like 18, 19. But we're talking about the 80s, so now I'm totally dating myself. But anyway, so, and in the process of my travels, what was interesting to me was I encountered a lot of conversations about myself, right? I spent some time in Scandinavia, I was in Europe. People were so interested in learning more about Haiti, and there was a limit to what I could say, right? 19 years old. So I could speak to it as a personal experience, yet I understood there was something broader and social going on, but I didn't have the language for it. So I came back to the US and realized I needed more education, right? So that I could explain this thing that is somehow an enigma for a lot of people. And I went through a little punk phase, so I had some anger about people's limited ways of understanding Haiti, right? Because it was always historical. It was, why is it so messed up? Why is it like this? And for me, there was always this sense of, one, you think you know what you're talking about, in reality you don't, because the way you see it is not the only way it is, right? That's just an aspect of life there. And then the other thing I was very clear about was it wasn't always like this. So then the answer for me is, how did it become this way? And that's how I ended up deciding that I was going to become an anthropologist, because it was about, how do I explain Haiti to people so that they understand what I'm saying, so that they don't revert back to these very simplistic ideas that we tend to have and we go to by default. So I then went back to school. I was trying to do this fashion thing before that. It's just very weird. I was actually at Fashion Institute of Technology and trying to be a singer, and then I decided I'm going to become an anthropologist. It's all related. And then so I went to school, and within a couple years, I knew I was going to get a PhD. Again, the issue for me was always, once I have a certain type or kind of knowledge, I can be a better advocate and a better help to Haiti. It was always, how do I help my country? Because it's so misunderstood, or people just don't, they have a very limited sense of it. So that's what I did. And when I returned to school, I just went straight to graduate school. However, real life intervened, and there was a coup in Haiti in 1991. And I remember at that point realizing I can't do my research under fire, right? I'm not interested in doing field work in an environment where there's a lot of turmoil, because then what kind of work are you producing? And then I had a wonderful, wonderful encounter with the late anthropologist Michel Wolfe-Trouillot. I wrote him a letter, actually. That was back in the days, right? Wrote a letter, handwritten letter, where I asked him to be my mentor, and he said no. But there's a fun part to this story. He said, no, I'm too busy. I have my own students at Johns Hopkins at the time, which is where he was. And I said to him that I, wanted to help Haiti, and I wanted, I'm going to become an anthropologist and help Haiti. And he suggested, and this is to me one of the most valuable things that advice that I got from him, that I not study Haiti. Rather, I study some other place within the Caribbean. And his reasoning was that Haiti's been sort of more or less wrapped up in a narrative of exceptionalism, that going in and zooming in and just going there and doing the work there would only reinforce that, especially since I've had no other experiences. And then there's also the danger of when you are a native to a place and you go study it, you think you know it. So his suggestion then, go somewhere else in the Caribbean, do your work, and then eventually you'll return to Haiti, and when you do, you'll have a more comparative lens to apply to it. And it's one of the most important advice that I ever had professionally, and it did do a lot in terms of my theoretical ways of thinking and framing and understanding what's possible with the discipline as well. So I did my research in Jamaica. I went to Jamaica on a study abroad program, and heard someone talk about these women who did import-export, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna write my dissertation about that. Things like that tend to be the way I make my decisions. Sure. And ended up spending years and years talking to a lot of people, spending a lot of time in Kingston in the arcade, and then I wrote about women who do import-export, and they travel all over the Caribbean, and they buy goods wholesale, which they then retail in Jamaica. So, and my interest then was to follow up and do a life history project, as well as a project based on the arcade where they sell their goods. And then within a year of my book being published, the arcade was actually in a fire, arson, very complicated. And it was one of those other moments where I had to realize, can I follow up in doing work in an environment that has other dynamics going on, and what did that mean? And that was about 2008, 2009, and then the earthquake happened, which then shifted everything for me in terms of what my interest is. That's a long answer.
It's a really interesting story, and there's a lot to pick up on in it.
I'm sorry.
No, which is a really good thing, but I'm just wanting to backtrack to a certain point.
Sure.
Where you were talking about making the decision to go into anthropology as a way to address these questions of home and how you could help people back home, because I feel like for a lot of people their first impression of anthropology is that it's the study of an other or the other, or something, a culture other than your own. So I'm wondering what you thought was how you thought about anthropology at that point in your life, and whether or not that's changed as you've moved through your work.
Well, it's changed a lot, but I think the thread that remains is it's a way to explicate the world. It is really, for me, a way to deal with social phenomena that can be very interactive, I should say that, because that's our other question, right, in terms of like different ways of disseminating information. But it was also, it was the way I came to understand the world. So that's what makes it really personal, right? Because I think backtracking in terms of my why, in the 80s, it was a very difficult time to be Haitian in the US, right? Because we're talking about what was going on and just at the very beginning of HIV, and I don't know if you know about the 4 H's. And Haitians, homosexuals, hemophiliacs, and heroin users were considered to be the 4 carriers of the HIV virus. So it was just, and I was an undergraduate, and I remember this very clearly, not too clued in, and going to the Red Cross to give blood, and they said, no, you can't, because you're Haitian and you came to the US after 70, whatever. So it's sort of how we are branded and what that meant. And so it had nothing to do with who I was personally. It was what you were as a category, and what does that category represent. So that was the thing for me about anthropology. It was always a tool through which you can make sense of the world and make sense of it in a way that dispels a lot of myths, especially because our tendency is to think of things in very, very simple ways. And what's exciting to me about anthropology is that it actually takes something that we think is simple and shows you how complex it actually is. And for me, it made me, like, I get excited that something is complex as opposed to being fearful that there's so much more to it. And I'm like, well, that's the whole point, because we think we know, when in reality, once you start to sort of unpack it, it's unstable, you know what I mean? So, so that was a big part of it. And it was less to help home as much as to help other people understand what I consider to be home, because those categories are also quite damaging, right? So then something as understandable for that time, I mean, it's still highly problematic, as you can't give blood because, well, you've taken a whole peoples and you've put them under this category, and they're now stigmatized. And, you know, and it was really interesting too, because in terms of what happened in terms of Haitian response to that, because there was huge protests and people like literally like blocked the Brooklyn Bridge when all of this was going on. So in terms of, you know, what it means to sort of label people in certain ways, and what kind of impact that has, and how do people live these categories? Because I think ultimately that's the thing for me, whether it's Haitian or what have you. You know, it's a category, and categories are just that, they're cliches. And so then it's so important to sort of like show that they're actually more complex than that.
So this is, I mean, this is something that you've written about a fair bit, is challenging simplified understandings of the world, but also challenging simplified representations of parts of the world, or cultures or communities or countries or what have you. So I'm wondering if you could just speak to the role of anthropology in terms of this idea of representation, or how that's fed into your work. I know that's a broad question.
No, it's actually a really important question, and a wonderful question, because I'm obsessed with representation. And I usually say I have a very healthy obsession with representation. And especially when you look at how anthropology as a discipline has contributed to the making of these representations, right? So, I mean, I think one of the things for me, looking at the development of my career and how I sort of have had to navigate the discipline, a fascinating thing for me is sort of, I'll give you like a very anecdotal thing. So in the beginning, I would say to people years ago, it's like, oh, what are you studying? I'm like, anthropology. People would be like, oh, really? Right? Because Black women are not, you know, if I said business, that makes sense. If I said law, that made sense. But anthropology is esoteric, and it is about studying the other, and I am another. So that somehow didn't quite resonate with people, which is, I get that less now, which to me says something, right, about, you know, how things have changed a bit in this world. But what's always been interesting to me about just pursuing that is knowing what it means to enter into a field, a discipline in which you've always been the subject. So then can you, and how do you overturn that, right? Which has been a challenge and continues to be a challenge. But I think one of the things that I can say, and others can as well, is there's been some changes in certain aspects of the field, and then there are other places where it's pretty much rigid, and it still is. It's still a battle. But what I appreciate is the fact that there are so many different peoples in so many different countries and so many different schools that are actually trying and challenging these sort of like more mainstream ideas that when you look at what's happening in anthropology today, it's definitely not the anthropology of yesteryear, right? It's not armchair anthropology where someone just, you know, gets into I don't know, they get, like, first they have to get someone to fund them, and then they get they take the ship with their trunks very far away. And then, you know, they go and they study the other, because what's very clear nowadays is that the other is right here, and then the other actually studies themselves, and they study you as well. Because I think that's the other thing about looking at issues of representation. When you're looking at people who've been peripheralized, as Faye Harrison says, that, and who are now doing anthropology, inevitably part of what we are lineage, you know, part of this longer lineage of questioning and challenging how the discipline has represented us. And then what do we have to say about that? So that's been kind of interesting and fun, actually, at times, but also difficult because you're challenging the status quo.
Sure. And I'm wondering actually if you could speak a little bit more about how you see the potential of anthropology as a discipline in terms of that sort of advocacy, or that sort of potential to challenge, or that kind of activist work as part of it.
I think it differs depending on who the person is, the kind of work that they are doing, where they work, whether they're inside or outside of the academy. I'm a weird hybrid, I think, in part because of that. You know, the history that I just spoke to is a history in which, even though I never stated that I was doing quote-unquote public anthropology, I've been on that track. I mean, it was very clear, and I just finished a book that's getting ready to come out next year, and it's Why Haiti Needs New Narratives, and I actually finally like stand on this, you know, mantle of public anthropology, and because it's Why Haiti Needs New Narratives, the making of a Post-Quake Chronicle, and it's basically blogs and essays that I wrote after the earthquake, and what was, you know, about how this thing came to be really, because it wasn't a planned project, is the earthquake happened and I started to write. And I went on this writing stint for like 2 years, and I ended up writing a number of pieces. So we've pulled it together, and I wrote an introduction about the anthropologist as a public intellectual, right? Because these are the ways through which we can intervene, whether it is through policy, which is not my interest at all. I'm very much interested in representation because I think there's a need to interrogate these images and these ideas to show the damage that they cause, right? Less so than being in contact with government and policymakers, or even working with communities and the ways that other public anthropologists do as advocates and so forth. That's not what I do. What I do is look at histories of certain perceptions or images and interrogate those to point to the various ways through which history remains alive today, right? Because that's a really significant problem. When you think about, for example, I didn't want to go there, but I'm going to go there, and you can figure out how you edit, whatever you edit. So I have this project that I'm doing, this performance project on, it's called Voodoo Doll, What If Haiti Were a Woman? Like what it means to take that notion of voodoo and unpack it. And one of the pieces that I'm working with right now is this article from the New York Times that was published by this Austrian artist. It's called A Voodoo Castle in Haiti. And it is an article about the Citadel La Filière. And the Citadel was built after the revolution. So how does a fort built basically to protect one's sovereignty become a voodoo castle? Right? Because that's how it's framed to the world. It's a voodoo castle. It's actually a fort. And it's built at, you know, at this high peak so that people in the fort can see the entire environs of the island, you know, so that they could see when the enemies are approaching. We're talking about like, you know, so it's very fascinating to me then, like how categories were first created and then how they're maintained. And I think I've gathered and I've gained the tools through anthropology in terms of thinking about especially the role of and the impact of history and the making of certain and sustaining of certain ideas. So I'm really big in terms of, okay, if we're talking about race, if we're talking about gender, we need to actually think about this through time and what it was and what it is now and what are the remnants of some of those or vestiges of some of those ideas. I'm sorry, that's like, I tend to talk a lot.
Which is perfect. But I'm wondering, so you talked us through going through your PhDs, starting to do your PhD on a country other than Haiti, and then at some point turning back and going back to Haiti and looking at that as the main focus of your work. So I'm just wondering if you could talk us through what was the turning point that drew you back to Haiti in the end, and how did that affect, I mean, did you have to rethink anthropological methodologies or things like reflexivity, subjectivity in terms of doing an anthropology of the home, you know, of your own roots?
Right, yeah. I mean, I think the thing is with me in the work in Haiti, as I was doing my dissertation work, my PhD, which eventually became the book, I always did work on Haiti on the side, quote unquote. And that was my performative work. That was the poetry. So, you know, for the longest time, I had this sort of bifurcated career where I was the quote-unquote anthropologist to the extent that I stayed in the box, because I know it's hard to stay in the box. And then I was this sort of poet performer person, right, who did her work in Haiti. But it's not as if the two didn't sort of flirt with each other. Because when you look at my performative work, it's very much driven by theory, and it's based on anthropological methods, and as far as I actually do field work, and I actually do archival research, and I do a lot of historical work, and I play with theory a lot in my performative work, right? And so then what was interesting is doing the quote-unquote more traditional work, to the extent that it is traditional, I couldn't escape the fact that I was a Haitian in Jamaica. Right? So in a sense, part of what was happening is these two worlds were sort of colliding, or sort of like engaging with each other in ways that I certainly couldn't control. So the same training I got is the same training that I use for this other kind of work. And I think one of the things to say to clarify it is that I was always interested in more feminist methodologies, of which reflexivity is a huge component, and sort of like this emphasis on looking at subject positioning. So by the time I started to go and, away from Jamaica, I was already doing that work because I was always interrogating who I am within a Jamaican space. And I was interrogating who I am within a Jamaican space because Jamaicans were pointing out that I am Haitian, right? You see what I mean? Because this is one of the things that I think is most fruitful about doing reflexive work. If you're normative, you're not going to get questioned because you're normative. You are that against which everything else is measured. When you're not that, so I used to get people who would say to me, okay, you look like one of us, but you're not Jamaican. So what are you? This is when I'm doing my fieldwork in Jamaica. So do I say nothing? Right? Do I write when the time comes and I'm writing about this? Do I pretend that never happened? And then I can write as sort of this quote-unquote norm, but I'm not really a norm. Especially since in my relationships with people there, it was very clear, we expect more from you. When you go back and you write this book, we want to hear from you, right? So there's a certain amount and a certain kind of expectations that are different when people can relate to you differently, right? Because that's what it means to be different. The relationships are not the same, right? We don't have to think that there's some one way through which people interact with each other. So then I was, I just confronted that, and I liked knowing that I could point that out as a way to show that what you think is normative is actually not normative. It's just another different person or being or situation, right? So that's how that came about. I don't know if I'm answering the question.
Absolutely. In fact, it brings me really, really nicely to something else that I was wanting to ask further about, which is that, so you're talking about your anthropological grounding in theory and practice informing your performative practice, and I'm wondering if that relationship also goes back the other way.
It goes back the other way. I get very sassy in my anthropology as a result of the performer. I mean, I think that's one of the things that, it's because every time I think about it, and there are certain things I've done, and I'm like, did you just do that? It's like, yeah, you did. But that's the performer who sort of understands limits and boundaries, and also who's very much invested in engaging in a different kind of way, because part of the appeal of performance to me is the one way to deal with the visceral, right? So, and what I think, that what I came to that I'm very comfortable with is recognizing that part of my training was turning me into this sort of super cerebral being, and I was leaving the body behind. So back in the day, it's not quite as harsh now, but that's really what it was, because the point in mastering theory is not about engaging with the body and sort of like what's happening to your body. You know what I mean? Or just in terms of your consciousness about who and what you are, where you are. So the performative person has an opportunity to sort of express that other aspect. Oh yeah, so while we were in class and talking about Louis Henry Morgan, I was really getting sick. You know what I mean? It's like, that was just a fact. That's just kind of like, we were discussing craniology and I was going, they're talking about me. That's real, right? So then do you, in my case, me, because I don't think it's a proverbial you, pretend this is not happening to me and just keep going? Like I'm like, don't relate to this. It's not part of the history, but it is. I'm part of a continuity of something that once categorized me in a very specific way. And this thing, right, this discipline has changed over the years to such a point that I can now stand and do this, even us having this conversation. So if I don't point to it, how did I get here? So that's really part of what drives it, and that's part of where the sassiness comes from, right? It has to do with, this is an opportunity to actually point to the change. It's a way to show that things have changed.
But in a way, I mean, there's an aspect of, there's something that you're communicating through the performative aspect of your teaching or your work within the academe. But I imagine that there's also something in the way that you're communicating that must be important to bring into the realm of academic anthropology as well, right? I mean, it's not every anthropology professor who's also a performance poet and brings that into their work. And so I'm just wondering how you found that experience of challenging the ways in which knowledge is formally transmitted within this environment, like through bringing in different aspects of yourself.
Yeah, well, it's been interesting. It's been interesting to navigate professionally, because, in part what I had said earlier, what people think of as scholarship, in terms of in which scholarship matters more. So, there's really multiple things going on there. But I think one of the things that I know, and then if you realize and you understand that performance is part of anthropological tradition, and so you can rely on that, right? So as much as I just pointed out that I sort of get sassy and so forth, I'm also very strategic. It's about understanding how does one build a professional portfolio and what it means to sort of push the limits of a discipline. What are the ways through which you can do that? What's acceptable, what's not acceptable. I remember one time I did a performance at the AAA on a panel, and it was a while back. And the funny thing for me, though, was it was 2001. That was a big turning point for me. It was right after 9/11, and I just got back from DC, and a friend called me and was just like, it's a good thing you just got home because it's what just happened. So it was one of those critical moments where you realize life is short. I was supposed to fly out that Monday and I didn't. So, and it just changed me, and I was just like, well, life is too short. I'm just gonna perform. And I remember people were like, so it's like you can literally hear a pin drop, because this is not supposed to happen here, right? But the thing about that too is that's usually how things happen, right? But the thing I think that's I don't even know what the word is to say about this. For me, part of what's good about it is knowing the work is so grounded. Theoretically, it's so grounded in terms of the ethnography. It's the disruption or the intervention becomes a point of contention because people don't quite know what to do when you bring a lot of emotions into a space that they think is going to be cerebral. Do you see what I'm saying? It's and this is part of what I do. I've got this really heavy voice, it's impossible to say, especially if I start chanting, that I'm not like retching stuff up, but I'm like, hey, we need to kind of take it out there and kind of look at it. Because I think we haven't looked at it. Why it's important that we look at it, just turn it around and then go, oh, so this is what it is, and then we can leave it alone. So it's been interesting to do that, right? When I first came to this job, it was really interesting. It was mostly all my students knew I was a performer, and they would invite me. This is like a big secret that I'm now putting out in the world. They would invite me to like these student events, and I would go, and they were so thrilled and just so excited because I was speaking to them in a way that, you know, just lecturing and so forth does that. But what it also did was it also showed me there were other ways to take all this information that I now had and sort of like share it in different ways, right? So, but what's interesting is it's not as if there isn't a field called performance studies. So it's more of a matter of what it means to be within a discipline, within a university system that is wedded to disciplinary boundaries. Even though we talk about interdisciplinarity, there's a lot of anxieties about what it means to cross disciplines because careers are built on that, right? And basically when you start saying, I do interdisciplinary work, it's like, well, what's going to happen to me? And I'm usually like, I don't know, but I think I'm going to be okay. You know what I mean? So I think a big part of it has to do with like sort of the anxiety around, but I wasn't trained that way, right? And it's very much a generational thing because when you look at younger scholars, it's what I do is nothing to them because they're being trained and performing, and you know, whether it's any kind of performance work. They're artists and they're also doing anthropology and so forth. So it's a lot, I think, it's not necessarily easier, but there's more openings and more spaces now. So it really is just, to me, I think it's a matter of like, how do you negotiate all of that? I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I wonder if you just briefly before we come to a close, I wonder if you'd be interested in or able to at all give a little example of any, even just through a story of something that's...
Well, you know, I can send you links to stuff because I have a lot of stuff online.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I have, yeah. But here's what I can say in closing. To me, I think, you know, so I've made more or less, I'm making this turn to more public work. As I had said earlier, I'm completely dedicated to this Huffington Post series that I keep doing about why anthropology still matters, because to me, the world is lost without this discipline, because it really is like one of the main avenues through which we can discuss difference in the world, like in a way that is substantive, right? And not just to be like a bullet point and then it's like, oh, no, really do deep hanging out and deep work. The thing about performance to me is, it's part of what I said earlier. It's so that when we're doing that explanation, we're doing that discussion, we don't leave a part of us behind. And we tend to do that because I think, you know, one of the things that's happening in this country now, I mean, I'm going to go on a tangent, but just allow me that for a minute. You know, this whole thing about the trigger warning, have you heard about this?
Maybe just give a little bit of background to contextualize.
I don't even remember where this started, but there's sort of a call on the part of some schools or some students to have this, you know, quote unquote trigger warning on syllabi or on the part of professors so that students know that they're about to engage material of a particular kind that has the potential to be unsettling, especially if they've been traumatized. One of the things that I think is really fascinating about this, it really points to how education has changed over the years, especially going back to what I said about teaching to the test. We tend to include less history now in how we teach students before college. So by the time they come to college, they haven't been exposed to the kind of material that would have warned them that something that needs a trigger warning is coming up. And that's the crisis. It's not give us a trigger warning. It's more that let's teach history from the very beginning so that when students are reading at the college level, because this is a college level discussion, they're at least going to know, yes, slavery was that bad. You know, which is something that I've heard students actually say. And you can't fault them when they're not the ones who are determining what they read when they're in middle school or before that. So it's really pointing to sort of this staticization of history that's happening. I don't know if it's happening elsewhere, but I know for sure in this country. So then by the time students come to us at the college level, they have less and less knowledge of the past. So for me, as an anthropologist, you know, who thinks of anthropology and history as sort of co-joined, nothing could be more important than to be able to impart them with knowledge that sort of points that out. And what the performance does, and this is to the extent that I have a response to trigger warning, is it allows for a creative space to think about difficult material, right? Because I think the thing about part of the difficulty when you have to confront something you've never confronted, you don't have that many outlets for it. So what are the spaces that we can create within a classroom, for example, to say, and I just tell my students, oh, we're going to go into difficult material. You need to know it's difficult. But we go in knowing it is difficult, as opposed to, well, you shouldn't go to it because it's likely to affect you. And there's, you know, it's a whole other thing, but you'll do what you want to do with this. But I think it's important to point to the historical component, because that's what I think this is why they're less active also in terms of like these last bastions of activism on campus. They have less history. They have a little and little and little history. And I think that's only going to get worse.
Such an important point, and such a good point to close on, I think, but just really, really well explained, particularly in terms of the place of performance, to, you know, deal with material that's emotionally heavy in this sort of a setting where people maybe aren't necessarily expecting that all of the time. But yeah, I can see now it makes perfect sense.
That's why I do it.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I think we're at the limit, but it's been such a pleasure speaking with you.
I hope so.